Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. It is Monday, March 9th, and today the moon is full in the sign of Virgo. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Take a look at this full moon and see what you can expect. Let's start by taking a look at it on the screen. This full moon is also brought to you by Neptune because you'll notice that the planet Neptune is closely conjoined with the sun still, and this full moon is thus opposing Neptune, which gives it kind of an otherworldly aura. But let me just circle this on the chart first so you can see. So there's the sun in Neptune. Here's the moon opposing in Virgo. In Bhakti Yoga, we celebrate the birth of a famous saint, Lord Chaitanya, whose appearance day is today. So as the full moon rises this evening, many people will be fasting all the way up until that point, and then there's a pretty big celebration and a lot of dancing and kirtan and singing and so forth. And so it's an auspicious moon in my life because of the significations of this particular Virgo full moon, in the Bhakti Yoga calendar. But at any rate, this also brings up a really kind of otherworldly dimension. The Virgo Pisces axis is often known for being particularly spiritual, or for highlighting, I should say, the dichotomy between spirit and matter, or between worldly things and otherworldly things, or spiritual things and mundane things, and really the bridge between the two, or the union between the two as well. So that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. But here you can see the tension between the two. The full moon's perfecting very shortly here on the East Coast, which means it'll be just past full when it rises this evening. You could have caught it last night as well. My family was outside for a bonfire. It's pretty warm here. And so we sat out, looked at the moon rising, and had a nice bonfire on the porch. So yeah, you can make sure you check it out tonight. It's really super beautiful. And you can also see Venus up in the western sky after sunset, pretty bright in her own domicile, really pretty looking. Anyway, so that's what we're looking at. What can you expect from the full moon in Virgo? Well, remember, Virgo is, of course, the sign of Mercury. And that means that this full moon is not only opposite the sun and Neptune in Pisces, which is Jupiter's sign, but is also taking place in the home sign of Mercury. And Mercury is stationing right now in the very late degrees of Aquarius, where it will turn direct tomorrow. So we have a very airy and stationing, powerful Mercury turning direct in Aquarius right now that we have to talk about. We also talk about the Neptune and Sun conjunction. Now, I did a whole video on Neptune Sun a couple of days ago, so I'm not going to go too deeply into that because I've already covered it at length in a previous video. But we'll just say that Neptune and the Sun at this full moon time certainly represent the Jupiterian impulse to transcend, to connect with imagination, to connect with spirit, the religious or philosophical impulse within us that seeks the ideal, that seeks the greater unity in things, whether it's justice or truth or beauty or goodness or a sense of cosmic unity. These are Jupiterian themes, and they get amplified by the mysterious, enigmatic, mystical, and sort of hypnotic qualities of Neptune right now because of the Sun's conjunction with Neptune. So with all of that in the air at the moment, you might have been feeling that the past couple of days. We also have now this very earthy moon in Virgo. And remember that this means that the axis between Mercury and Jupiter is pronounced. If Jupiter represents that big whole, then Mercury is often about the relationship between all of the parts that comprise the whole, all of the networks and pathways that make sense and give coherence to the whole, the different pieces or intricacies of a puzzle, you might say, or the different lines in a code, or even the different, the different specific sections of the code of law in the legal system. Or if you're studying astrology, it's all of the individual technical parts of the language of astrology that you have to know in order to sort of understand the grammar of the sky. So the part and the whole, a simple way of thinking about it. But also, of course, this bridges the concepts of spirit and matter, where the world of the many, all of the different forms and shapes of the material world are somehow interrelated and also take part in the wholeness of divinity. And this is often one of the esoteric elements of the full moon in Pisces or Virgo, when this axis is highlighted, that will come into focus. Right now, there are a few things that this will, the way that this plays out will be very specific to what Mercury is doing in late Aquarius, stationing to turn direct. Aquarius is an incredibly idealistic sign. It's a Saturn-ruled sign. And Saturn, remember, is the planet that sits at the gateway between the visible and the invisible, and is therefore a distant, sort of dim, distant observer of the world. Like the Hermit card in tarot, Saturn kind of may sit on the mountaintop observing the world from a more cool, detached, sometimes even wintry, icy distance. So it can be, for example, Saturn can be related to the, not being able to show our emotions very easily because of the coldness, the detached nature, and the distance. But also, Saturn is the ability to be objective, to be rational, to consider things from the mountaintop perspective. And when we put that Saturn rulership together with the air sign of Aquarius, we see the water bearer. We have the picture of the youth who was abducted by Zeus and made cupbearer of the gods. And that is a story that has to do with the potential for human beings to resemble the gods, to resemble divinity, and for progress to be made in human civilization toward that ideal that is divine, or that sits on Mount Olympus. So there's a lot of lofty idealism in Aquarius, but of course, where there is idealism, there is also necessarily a distancing from the world of mundane things. For example, as parents, you probably all know this. You try to set a rule down, if you're a parent, about how things should go. Well, we pick up after we put our toys away, or something like that. And that is like up here, and the reality is, sandwiched somewhere between, soggy saltine crackers mashed into cracks somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, it's not happening. So we have a problem before us. We are creatures who are idealists, but on the other hand, we live in the mundane world. And actually, the sign of Virgo resembles this very dichotomy as well. Aquarius is called a humane sign, so is Virgo. They picture human characters, characters who display some element of elevated rationality compared to, say, what are called beastly creatures or bestial creatures like Taurus or, the ram. So, and there are these dichotomies actually were something that our guest speaker, Wade Caves, over the weekend was talking about in a guest talk that he gave in my Nightlight speaker series. Anyway, in Virgo, we have something like the Puella being the eternal youth. This is kind of like the eternal young girl. As Aries was traditionally a young man, also the hired hand, the hired helper, sort of like a mercenary or a young, free, uncommitted young boy who could be hired to fight or work or something like that, but he was kind of a free figure. The Antisha to Aries is Virgo, and Virgo represents sort of the harvest maiden or the virgin, which sometimes is signified as a young girl with a bird on her shoulder or angel wings. And this, of course, represents the eternal nature of feminine youth. This is an archetype. And so it's like Peter Pan for girls. Aries is a bit like Peter Pan for guys, where you can, doesn't specific literal gender is not so important, but you get the idea. The feminine or the masculine as youthful, unfettered, free, unattached, unobligated, free to come and go as they please. The word virgin, as many of you probably know by now, most astrologers are teaching this about Virgo at this point, is that the word virgin meant in some ways uncommitted. It didn't mean, a prude 16-year-old who won't make out with her boyfriend, or you know what I mean, some of these images that we get of virgin, whatever, or someone who's extra pure and chaste, or whatever the case might be. So actually it meant uncommitted. Virgin goddesses were goddesses that were not necessarily unsexual or asexual. They could be very sexual, but they were simply they came and went as they pleased. They were unowned. They weren't the property of anyone. So this idea of the, kind of like the gypsy maiden, the one who is, free to roam and travel and is more nomadic, or um, has some way of being free. Now that is a part of Virgo. Not everyone knows that, because we often think of Virgo, we think of the earthy, dry, practical, cold, mercurial parts of the sign, which are more rational, technical, concerned with purity and efficiency, liking to be of service, liking to be helpful or useful, critical, picky, fussy, but very organized, good at details, smart, intelligent, articulate, communicative. Really mercurial stuff comes to mind, right? But the other thing you have to remember with Virgo is that bird on the young girl's shoulder, or the angel wings that come out. It's as though, even though Virgo is an earth sign, Virgo is always hovering just a couple of feet. The feet are hovering just a couple of feet above the ground as the Virgin walks. And so there is this way in which the Virgin is an otherworldly zodiacal sign. In fact, it sits right on the cusp between the end of summer and the beginning of autumn. And that transition from the yang of the year into the yin of the year is also very important, because Virgo sits at the cusp of the preparation for harvest and the judgment that happens. The harvest, we reap what is sown. And so there's a sense in Virgo of the sense of otherworldly justice or karma, or the paying attention to results, as though there is a spirit world, and that the actions that we take in this world are judged, and the results have something to do with our spirit, which has a life beyond just the body. This is why, for example, in the Hall of Mot in the Egyptian underworld, the heart is weighed against a feather. It's a clear discrepancy. The feather obviously is not ever going to be as heavy as a heart. Yet, if the heart is symbolically lighter than the feather, the soul passes on to the afterworld in a positive manner. What does this mean? It means that our actions are judged not simply by their appearance, but by their internal substance, the substantive intentions of the spirit, and why we do what we do, why we're acting and behaving the way we're behaving. It could look good, it could look nice, it could be very efficient, pure, whatever, but it could be, we sometimes, like, you ever had classic thing with Virgos, you always have to be careful of is, like an eating disorder or something like that. Virgo, of course, was related to digestion in the stomach, but the potential to be so critical of oneself and hold up an image of purity that is not rooted in spirit, but is rooted in matter, looking in the mirror and saying, how do I compare to this person or that person? So there's a lot of discrimination and potential judgment in the sign of Virgo that can, that the anticipation of being judged or evaluated can be there. But what's the standard? Who's the one making the judgment, or whose judgment are we concerned about? And so, Virgo's concern with, one of the things that Virgo is often learning is the difference between the material level of discrimination and discernment and the spiritual level. This is why, for example, oftentimes Virgos will play by the letter of the law in lots of things that they do, but there comes some point in their life where they need to break the rules, or break convention, or break other people's expectations and do something that's sort of racy, or, kind of edgy, or provocative, or what have you. And the reason for that is, again, one of the things that Virgo is often discovering has to do with this sense of what is real purity. Not what does it look like in the world of external judgments and discrimination, but what does it look like on the level of spirit? And so sometimes there's some overcompensating and some calibrating that Virgos have to do, figuring out what is real purity, what is real goodness, and how does it show up? How can I see it in the world of tangible, practical, earthly results? There's the dichotomy between the bird or the angel wings and the young girl who's a creature of the earth. So this concern for purity, this concern for sanctity and dignity and integrity is so important to Virgo, and yet you have to be very careful, because we can measure it in very superficial or external ways. So all of this is amplified right now by the fact, all of these themes are amplified by the fact that we also have the ruler Mercury stationing, which means it's like a ball that's like an orb, and it's glowing, it's going wow, 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 wow. It's like it's getting louder. And that's Mercury stationing to turn direct in another sign that has a lot to do with the ideal. Aquarius is not as in touch with the dichotomy between the ideal and the mundane. Virgo is a sign that is trying to embody the transition or the bridging between the two as it stands on the threshold of the yin and the yang of the year, the yang being the summer and the yin being the autumn. And so the concern with judging and discriminating between spirit and matter and trying to do good or be right and be evaluated, get a good grade, so to speak, but to figure out what that actually means. What is the healthy way of judging and evaluating our efforts and results on the level of spirit, not just matter, but also not excluding matter, right? Virgo straddles that line very mutably, right? But Aquarius has more to do with that, the sense of the high law, the high expectation that can very easily alienate us from the world. That's why the youth that the water bearer image is that of a youth who's abducted up to Olympus and taken away and sort of robbed of earthly things. That's why Aquarius is sometimes related to Uranus and Uranus to Prometheus, about the one who wants to steal the fire, the information or the knowledge, the wisdom of the gods and bring it down to earth, because there's some sense of it being far and remote and unfair that humans can't have access to that high, lofty thing. So Aquarius has a bit more, its nature is Saturnine. Saturn is the planet of polarization, rules opposites in astrology. And so the Aquarian dynamic right now has us pretty fired up about the ideal, the high standard, right? Everything shall be picked up after it is taken out at the end of the day, the living room standard in my house, right? And it's way up here. Virgo is a bit more about trying to figure out how to move gracefully and fluidly between that standard, right, and the reality that we're living with, the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, moving back and forth fluidly. But it's hard to do so when Mercury is just like, bam, like really lofty in Aquarius with stationing, which means it's about to turn direct and it wants to start implementing the realization of some high ideal. So you can look at this in your life and see, like, when things aren't working in the way that you want them to right now, there can be a deeper sense of frustration or overwhelm or what have you. Also, the feeling of needing to get organized or needing to somehow, live up to a high standard, but feeling like, what, gosh, I keep trying but failing and I might as well just give up. So sometimes we collapse, especially with Neptune on the other side of the opposition right now, we can collapse into this attitude that's like, well, you know what? The high standards are just for perfectionists and people who aren't in touch and are trying to spiritually bypass and blah, blah, blah. And so if we suggest, we can do better, we can be better in any way, it's very easy right now to take offense to that and to say, you know what, that's just not practical, and I don't have to listen to that, right? And so the thing that Aquarius often provokes is the high standard, and then our relationship with the high standard often provokes rebelliousness, right? So that's not always a good thing to have high standards, because the high standard, like, if you have, anyone knows who's raised kids, that have been a kid in your own household, that the higher the standard was and the more rigid it was, the more that, it probably stimulated within you the spirit of rebellion. So rebelliousness is in the air right now. But we have to be careful, because sometimes the problem isn't the standard that we're seeking. It's how we're holding it. It's how we're approaching it. It's how we're moving toward it within the framework of our mundane lives. For example, a lot of people nowadays, let's go through some of the list of what you might see. For example, it is very, very common right now in our culture, like just generally speaking, if you flip on any social media network and on your phone or whatever and look at it, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all these things, one of the most common things that you see are people who are expressing moral, political, cultural, some kind of outrage. Now, it's almost never the case that people don't have a reason to be outraged or angry, right? So to say that someone's anger is irrational would, of course, be not very fair. Most people have reasons for being mad that, hopefully can be listened to. But on the other hand, in a culture of moral outrage and a culture of complaint. Let's call it that. Let's say that we live in a culture where people love to voice their outrage or their complaints or their dislike of something that exists in the world. Okay, so fair enough. There's a lot to complain about. There's a lot to be outraged about. But one of the things that we learn with this mutable axis between Pisces and Virgo, with the, again, thinking of that Mercury stationing in late Aquarius right now, is that we can do things to practically move toward the realization of our values, our goals. If we think that something isn't working in the way that it should, or it should be a different way, there is almost always a better way of working toward it than expressing moral outrage, right? There's almost always a better way of moving toward it than complaining. And there's almost always a better way of moving toward it than feeling justified in our complaints or our outrage with a sense of self-righteousness because we've been hurt or harmed by someone or something. It's not that any of the reasons for being angry aren't valid. It's not that the cause isn't just. It's not that the ideal isn't good. It's that if we stay stuck in the complaint, if we stay stuck in the sense that something isn't as it should be, that the perfectionism can take over. And this is a problem for Virgo with the, stationing Mercury in Aquarius. And it, even Neptune and the sun can amplify the feeling of some ideal, right? So what are the actual practical ways that we make progress in spiritual life so that we learn to live with the fact that, we have the standard of, stuff picked up in the living room, but we're living with the reality of, caked treats and Cheerios stuffed everywhere. You know what I mean? So first of all, here are some things that we can adopt that really merge together the Piscean and Virgoan axis. We can listen more than we speak. So, and this is not, some people like to talk, and that's fine. Some people like myself, I talk for a living. So what I mean when I say listen rather than speak is when you're feeling that something isn't just, that something isn't right, when you're feeling that sense of moral or political or social outrage, when you're feeling the complaint rising up within, sometimes the simplest practice is to, in those moments, say, right now is a time for me to listen. Because oftentimes when we feel that way, we're getting overtaken by a voice. And the voice may be right, but almost always the voice is never so right as to be so loud and so insistent and so angry. And so one of the best practices we can do is just say, I'm feeling so angry right now. I'm feeling so outraged. Something isn't working the way it should, or it's not efficient, or I have a complaint about something. I'd like to argue, or I'd like to, pump my fist, or whatever the case might be. And instead we say, now is the time I'm going to listen. And we can practice that with anyone. We can just say, I'm just going to take time this evening. I'm feeling ticked off about the news, or I'm feeling upset about the politics, or I'm feeling upset about this or that thing that's unjust in the world. And tonight I'm going to listen. Tonight I'm going to listen, or today I'm going to listen. I say tonight because usually tonight is the only time of my day where I actually check up and see what people are posting, because I'm usually doing readings and stuff all day. So, but tonight or today or whenever, I'm going to just listen. I'm going to hear and just take in. And oftentimes when we really feel and allow our hearts to feel and hear what people are saying, then the outrage in us dies down, because empathizing with someone else naturally keeps our heart open. And it's like, you find just the right temperature for your tea. You know what I mean? Like once you found just the right temperature for your tea, you typically get kind of set on it. When you're in your office, or you go every day, if you go to Starbucks on the way to work or whatever, you're like, no, I know exactly how hot I need my tea to be to drink it and everything. But we can't find that place of just right in our internal, in our hearts and in our minds, typically, unless we are actively practicing listening. Because listening is what takes us into the center, into our hearts. And then when we're in that space of listening, then when the voices within us of outrage come up, we're like, ooh, my tea is getting too hot. You know what I mean? Like, oh, no. That's like, you're just pumping a bunch of caffeine into me. I I like green tea, not black. I like one shot, not three. You know what I mean? You know exactly what your taste is. And when you find the taste of love in the heart, which is a practice that comes through listening, through humbling ourselves to being present to other people and what their concerns are, what their reality is, not ours. It has a way of like, then when any voice comes into our head that's outraged, we're like, oh, that's another someone I have to listen to. And we listen to that voice and we listen to it from that space of the heart, it comes right in and it doesn't overheat us. You know what I mean? Mixed metaphors, but I hope you follow it. Anyway, looking inward rather than criticizing. Here's another thing that comes up. When something isn't right, when something isn't pure, when something doesn't feel like it's working, the temptation is there not only to make a complaint or to have some kind of outrage, but it's also tempting for us to want to criticize. I'm justified in my criticism, you know, and if you're telling me not to criticize, then you're telling me to be weak. You're telling me to roll over. You know what? No. Okay. So it's hard to get people unaddicted to 6 shots of espresso in their head. You know what I mean? So we can have our feeling of injustice, our complaint, we can have all of it, but we can have it in a way that mobilizes us in the spirit of love. And in the spirit of love, one of the simplest practices, other than listening to people as a practice, which then tends to soften all outrage, complaints, problems, irritations, imperfections, is we can also look inward rather than criticizing. When we see something or someone that is wrong, as a practice, if we just take a moment to look at our own faults and flaws first. And I know people are going to be like, oh, you know, I don't want to blame the victim. You know what? You're just telling me to like, look at myself. That's disempowering. I'm not going to be weak. Well, it turns out that our strength is not actually dependent upon how strongly we can criticize or feel justified in our sense of being right, or in our sense of, you know, someone else being wrong. Our strength, our real strength, actually comes from being able to thoughtfully and compassionately look inward and say, you know, before I judge others, how do I want to evaluate myself? Because I'll tell you this right now, most of us have 10 times the outrage toward others in the world than we do toward our own shortcomings. And when we start expressing outrage at our own shortcomings, we don't like it. It hurts. It's mean. It's not so nice the way we express outrage inwardly. And so if we do that at all with any degree of practice, the amazing thing is that we learn really quickly, outrage isn't the way to handle my own shortcomings. And so outrage isn't going to be the way to address the shortcomings of the world or a situation that I'm in either. But the only way we get there is by turning inward. Because by turning inward, it's not that we're saying, yeah, go beat yourself up. It's we're saying, don't beat anyone up. And the way you learn that is by turning inward and then saying, you know what, in order to turn inward, I have to be kind to myself. I have to be patient. I have to be compassionate and merciful. Right. And then we can show that to others. It's easier to show that to others when we're in the practice of doing that with ourselves. It's much harder to do that to ourselves than it is to others. If you don't believe me, let me tell you another story. 9 times out of 10 in astrology sessions, here's what people say. When it comes to something that's in their chart that's really good, the destined look of something that's good or beneficial in their chart, people will have no problem saying, I earned that. Somehow that's because, you know, of my innate goodness or my good karma or whatever the case might be. If it's something bad in their charts, 9 times out of 10, people are inclined to say, well, that wasn't my fault. That was somebody else's fault. That was some other thing that was out of my control. But when it is something good, it's no, that was in my control. So we have a messed up relationship with control, right? We don't like that we can't control imperfections in other people in the world. We don't like that we can't control how people treat us or look upon us or one group of people or another. We don't like that our political party isn't in power, or that the world doesn't look exactly the way we want through the lens of the government or the policies or whatever that we want. All of these things, right? And there's reasons behind all of it. But so much of how we make progress in the world ultimately is not rooted in our outrage about things not being the way that they should. If we want to make progress in some way, we have to be able to move forward perseveringly and softly, just like plants that are growing up through concrete are so flexible, so soft, so pliable, right? So we have to be tolerant. We have to be like trees. You know, trees are very tolerant, and they're also very flexible, and they move very slowly toward their goals. Sometimes I think, you know what, people are so inclined to want everything to be perfect, but we don't think about the perfection of our souls. And we're way impatient when it comes to perfection anyway. You know, think about how long it takes the universe to form, planets and solar systems, and then they all die eventually as well. We don't, you know, what if we had a 500 year or a 1,000 year plan for our souls? You know what I mean? Like if we can switch perspectives sometimes and slow down and think, I'm a tree that's going to take a long time to grow, or justice, mercy, truth, compassion in the world are going to take a long time to grow. That's austerity. That's what real sacrifice is to realize I'm with it for the long game here. And we gain that perspective when we regularly turn the outrage, the criticism inward, where we then have to put it into the cauldron and realize like that's not a nice energy, you know? And so people love to justify it because they think the cause is urgent. They think it's now. They think there's no time but now. But actually the only time that matters in the universe is always the now, and it's always love in the now, right? And love in the now is often, you know, sitting in the ruins of the disappointments of the world, the problems of the world, and just being okay with them. So, and then from that space, we find the perseverance to slowly grow the world, grow ourselves, grow things in toward that higher ideal. So looking inward rather than criticizing, forgiving rather than condemning. Simple. It's like, take it as a practice over the next week. I promise you that this practice will change your life. It's something my own gurus and teachers have taught me. And I work with it all the time. I have to because I struggle with it. When something pisses you off, when some situation isn't up to the standard, when something about the world falls short, just look at it and take a moment and say, just really deeply in your heart, authentically be like, I forgive you. I forgive this. I forgive myself for not being what I think it can be. It's amazing how when we do that, naturally it's as though the environment is like, it's like a, you know, it's like a, all these mixed metaphors today, sorry. Oh, it's like a cat or a dog that rolls onto its belly and wants to be scratched, right? It's like, now I'm passive and receptive and I'm surrendered. When we forgive, we're surrendering, and the world around us, we start to see the soft belly and everything starts becoming sweet. And that's when real progress can be made, because everything starts becoming pliable and flexible. You need that to grow up through the hard resistance of the material world. Spiritual ideals are soft and subtle. And most of what we want in life, whether it's politically, socially, in our relationships, at work, when there's injustice, what we want is sweetness and love, and that is soft and subtle. And you have to grow up toward it through softness and subtleness most of the time. Yes, there's a place for the warrior, right? Yes, okay. But we're so into self-empowerment. We're so into being warriors that we forget that it's so the American way. It's so heroic. You know, we forget that softness, subtlety, care, compassion, gentleness, humility, sweetness, tolerance, you know, these things take us where we want to go, maybe more slowly than where we want. But the nice part is that even if we're going there more slowly, every step of the way is sweet. You know, every step of the way is love. And we can do that. It's possible. In any way, we should do that, because even if we build the most amazing kingdom of heaven on earth, the truth is the sun's going to burn out someday. This Titanic will sink. You know what I mean? And we have to remain aware of that in everything that we do, because how we succeed is as important as how we fail. How we go through a dark age or a dark time is as important as building toward the future light age. These are things that get highlighted across the Pisces Virgo axis, especially right now as we got Mercury stationing in those last critical degrees of Aquarius, has such high standards. Be outraged inwardly rather than outwardly. Look inward rather than criticize. If you're going to criticize yourself first and see how it feels, and then you'll learn that, you know, there's a good way, a healthy way of looking inward. When we do that, then there's a healthy way of looking outward as well. This is why, you know, in Jesus's teachings, that the two top, you know, things that he instructed his disciples when they asked him, what are the two most important teachings of the law? And he said, love God and love others. Simple. It's Mr. Rogers' neighborhood stuff. We forget it. You know, because we feel it's so easy to feel self-righteous in our complaint, in the imperfection, in the impurity. There's another idea here that's very important, is that it's not popular. Humility is not popular. Right now, empowerment is popular. But it turns out that, one of the most powerful things about humble people is they aren't easily offended or outraged. That doesn't mean that they're weak. It actually means that they're strong. But the way and the place that they are strong in is the place of love and compassion, tolerance, kindness, mercy, forgiveness. To be strong in those things takes an immense amount of work. It's not come across through being weak. It's come across through hard practice. We have to choose these things over and over again. And so right now, these are the standards. Think about these standards of our lives that we can move toward. And you know what? We move toward them inwardly, and we have the same thing when it comes to our inner life. Oh, it's a mess in here. I got to pick up at the end of the day. Well, at the end of the day, every day we sort of pick up our inner space, and we have to realize all the faults and flaws and mistakes and things that we did, but it's important to take daily inventory, because when we do that, we realize, boy, I've got to be kind, because, it's not easy. Maybe my standards are the way that I hold them is too intense. Usually the standards are good, but the way we hold them is too critical, too harsh, too intense, too severe. So we move toward them gradually by taking that inventory every day. If you want to be practical in a Virgoan way, think rather than, how can I cross my T's and dot my I's and get everything done on my to-do list materially. Think also of it spiritually. Once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day. Am I checking in with myself for 5-10 minutes, just zeroing everything else out and being like, I'm sitting down with my journal. I'm sitting to pray. I'm sitting to think and look at the sky. And I'm just owning the cruelness or the meanness or the shortness of temper or impatience or the way I wasn't present or whatever, those faults and flaws. And when we sit and be with those things, the one that starts sitting, the person who starts sitting with those things and kindly accepts them and warmly embraces them and says, it's okay, it's hard, that person is our soul. That's our soul. And our soul is Satchidananda. It's beautiful, it's wise, it's blissful, it's eternal, it's never been born, it's never dying. And when that being within us emerges, and it can't unless we stop and listen to ourselves. It can't unless we stop and turn inward rather than being focused. And when we deal with the imperfections in that place, the one who embraces, who holds, who loves us in that place, it's that being that we want to emerge. Because when that being starts emerging more and more, then we can really make the world a better place. Because we can reshuffle the world as much as we want. We can fight and scream and stamp our feet and be pissed off about anything we want and try and fix it. And we rearrange the Lego blocks and it looks really nice. But if we've never sat to let the compassionate, all-loving soul within us come out, then the same problems will appear in a different way. They'll show up in a different costume, a different mask, and we'll deal with the same frustrations and imperfections. So the feather and the heart, right? Those 2 images are there for us as well, along with a million other that I strung together today. Sorry again. I hope you enjoyed these. So I hope that you enjoy this talk and some things to think about with this very intense full moon energy right now. I think we are each capable of becoming more soulful and allowing the spirit soul within us to emerge. So hopefully some of these thoughts and ideas about Virgo are useful. And these things translate into how we handle other people in our lives and situations as well. And when I practice this, I can tell you right now that as a parent, just a really simple example, as a parent, I'm a much better example of how to, for my kids, I set the standard, but I also teach them that how to work with that standard in their humanness. I do a much better job of that when I'm practicing these things that I've talked about today myself. Then it's not like I'm like, oh, you failures, you didn't pick up the living room. Do you know what I mean? My outrage dies down, all of the sense of blame, judge, we didn't get to the standard, it dies down and it becomes more peaceful. And then if I start picking up the room, and I start picking it up, setting the example, and I say, well, remember, it's time to pick up at the end of the day. and I'm not outraged and pissed off and whatever about it, not only does the work get done, but usually that's when at least my older daughter, my younger one's not quite old enough to do this yet, but my older daughter will start picking up and not having a problem with it at all, right? The world rolls onto its belly and is like, shape me. We can bring out the best in the world when we practice grace and mercy. So anyway, uh, thank you guys for listening. I hope you have a very happy full moon. I'm also pleased to make 2 announcements. One is that today, later this afternoon, we will be launching my website, which means it should populate in the next day or 2, take 24 to 48 hours. So my new website will be up in the next 48 hours, which means pretty shortly I will be introducing new Bhakti Yoga content to those who sign up for my private newsletter, exclusive video content that I release only through my newsletter, which you can do on the website in a couple of days. And the other thing is that I have a personal assistant that I've hired thanks to the success of my Kickstarter, who's helping me this year with my classes and my programming and my emails and just tons of stuff that it's gotten overwhelming. I'll be introducing her at some point as well. She is awesome person. I'm really fortunate to have someone helping me. So I'll be excited to introduce her. I'll be doing that in my newsletter. But if you email me, and my personal assistant responds, now you'll know why. You'll be like, oh, who is this? Like, well, this is my new personal assistant. So I'll be introducing her in the next couple of days. My new classes in June, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, Year 1, my Year 2 program, and my Horary Astrology Apprenticeship. All 3 classes start in June. So I'll be telling you more about those in the weeks ahead and lots of cool content to come. All right, everyone, take care. Happy new moon or happy full moon. Bye.